Welcome to Ask a Lawyer with the attorneys at Karen Ann Ulmer PC. Today, it's April Townsend. She focuses on the intricacies of family law. Join us as Attorney Townsend answers your questions about the law and how it affects you.
When can grandparents seek custody or visitation rights in Pennsylvania?
So Pennsylvania does have a statute that addresses when grandparents can seek custody. And essentially they need to have standing to do so under the provisions of the statute in order to move forward with any type of custody case. A grandparent can obtain standing to file for any form of custody if they have been caring for the child, they've assumed responsibility for the child, and generally there's an issue with the natural parent. So that could be any type of parental abuse, drug or alcohol use, neglect, or incapacity. Or it could be a situation where if the child had been residing with them for at least a year, if they're abruptly removed from the home, a grandparent has an avenue to file within 6 months. Pennsylvania also allows grandparents to ask for visitation or some type of partial custody with their grandchild if there's a situation where one of the parents of the child is deceased, if the parents of the child are separated or divorced for at least 6 months, or again, if it's a situation where the child had been residing with them for a year and was subsequently removed. So those would be the areas in which a grandparent would be able to petition the court for custody in Pennsylvania.
Okay, so let's say all these requirements are met. Is adoption an option?
Adoption may be an option. So anytime that you are looking at adoption, that goes hand in hand with termination of the natural parent's rights. And that's something that could be voluntary. So if the parents agree that, the grandparents are going to be the best caretakers and they're okay with that adoption going through, then they could consent to that, and then the adoption can move forward once the parents have consented to their rights being terminated. But if the parents don't agree, then the grandparents would have to prove to the court that there are grounds for involuntary termination on the behalf of the natural parents. And that's usually something where the parents have more or less been missing in action from the child's life for a period of at least 6 months.
Now, grandparents are obviously going to be older. Life expectancy or, physically able to care for a grandchild to adulthood. What considerations are there? Let's say grandparent passes away or they're incapacitated. What happens to the grandchild, and are there some things that need to be considered in advance?
Yeah, well, I think for every custody case, the court needs to consider what's in the child's best interest, and oftentimes those factors are practical in nature, and so there would be some sort of consideration as to the type of care that a grandparent is physically able to provide. And if it gets to a point where they can't meet the appropriate standard of care, that's usually a situation where if there's not another party that's eligible to step in and take over that custody, that's where the social services agency, the local social services agency, would get involved and take necessary steps to make sure that the child is safe. So if necessary, they could remove a child from the grandparent's care and, place the child elsewhere if there was no one else available to take on that custody.
Okay, now a couple of other considerations. Health care, starting school. Are there any legal considerations or things to keep in mind?
Yeah, so when you're talking about school and health care, those are legal custody issues. And so with legal custody, grandparents can ask for that in a situation where they're asking for primary physical custody. So I guess you would kind of distinguish the situation where a grandparent's just looking for a weekend here or there, which would be visitation, versus a grandparent asking for more significant custody rights. But if they are going to have those more significant custody rights, that's where the legal custody comes in, and that would grant them the authority to make those type of major decisions on behalf of the child. And they would, usually need that form to show to their health care provider if they're looking to add a child to their plan, or to the school district if they're looking to enroll a child where they reside. So usually a legal custody paperwork would be needed for the grandparents as opposed to parents who kind of naturally just have the right to do those things.
April, anything else we should know?
Well, I think the interesting thing about the grandparent rights in Pennsylvania is that it's kind of in flux right now. There have been some recent decisions challenging the existing grounds under which a grandparent can file for custody. And the issue really boils down to the constitutional rights of the natural parents to decide, what should happen with their children. And to what extent the court and the legislature really should be able to interfere with their rights to decide what happens with their children. So specifically, there has been a case that has challenged the statute regarding partial custody or visitation to grandparents, and whether or not parties, by virtue of them being separated, should be subject to, litigation from grandparents about what happens with their children. And ultimately, the court in that case found that just because the parties are separated doesn't mean that they don't still have the same constitutional rights as parties in an intact relationship, and arguably they should still be able to dictate who is permitted to see their children. And that kind of opens up the door, I think, for additional litigation as far as if the grandparent statute as written should remain in place, or if it, will ultimately be scaled back some to balance it with the constitutional rights of parents. So that's something that, keeping an eye on and seeing how things develop as far as that's concerned.
Thanks for listening to Ask a Lawyer with the attorneys at Karen and Ulmer PC.